This year, Amazon are increasing the electric delivery vehicles we use across Europe to 10,000. It's a difference you'll notice on your doorstep, where babies are made a fuss of, where we deliver footballs for kids' kickabout, and where they deliver the football straight into next door's garden. Can they have their ball back, please? We're delivering change where it matters, on your doorstep. Delivery service partner vehicles across the UK and EU.
At QuickFit, we know winter's nearly here. Everything becomes pumpkin spice flavour, and you're scraping ice off your windscreen with your credit card. And while it's getting colder, it's a good time to check your tyres. At QuickFit, we stock Bridgestone Turanza all-season 6 tyres, guaranteed for 20,000 miles, that actually like rain, snow and ice. So while you get winter ready, make sure your car is too. Book today at quickfit.com or your local centre. QuickFit, drive away happy every time.
Good evening and welcome everybody. This is Obi-Wan Pez for N Simplex Pachinko. We are doing some building thinking classrooms by Peter Liljedahl tonight. So if anybody is not familiar with the series, we're working on attempting to go through a few different more like math education type texts, chapter by chapter, in order to see pedagogically, like, what are we doing, how are we teaching, all that good stuff. So we're going to, if the plan still holds, in 2 weeks' time, right, because today's the 3rd, yeah. In 2 weeks' time, we should be having a guest, and none other than Zach from either the 2i Pi. So if y'all don't know him, Zach is lovely. Apparently we're not synced or something like that. We'll get there. Perhaps we are not technically attached to chat at the moment. We've been having some problems with Twitch chat lately. I don't think it's just me, but It seems to not register when people are necessarily doing stuff. So apologies if that does affect you at any point in the near future. So thank you, Famished, as always, right on time. So yeah, oh, actually, if I go the other way, right? If I do it on this computer over here, it might register and go for it. And if not, then we know the problem's just all over the place. Yeah, I'm not seeing either of the messages on either of the other computer. So that's interesting. Well, anyway, Zach at Eat of the Two Eye Pie is going to be our guest in 2 weeks' time. I believe we're co-streaming a discussion all about Peter Liljedahl and how to, like, why it is that this is such a compelling method. There's a few other things that we're going to talk about, but for tonight, we're looking at chapter 14, which is hey, there it is. Connecting to chat. Oh, right. Rule number 1. Plug in the stuff. So, good news. Didn't really matter. Hey, let's see if we can do that now. There you go. So yeah, Zach is on right now, and will likely be over here, either just himself or the entire stream might raid. Kind of depends on the night. I think because he's doing software and game development, he's probably going to go to a coding stream, and then he probably will come over. You'll definitely hear it because I've got these blurp alerts, which are super loud.
But advertising on Spotify can help your business turn up the volume. With our easy-to-use ads
Okay.
manager,
So, as is usually the case, we'll go through Chapter 14 of Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl. This is the... Hopefully this will also come... Yay! This is the link to the book itself. If anyone is interested in math education, educational philosophy, educational psychology, teaching methods, and mathematics, I already said math education, but or if you have a friend who is going into math education, then maybe this book could be for you/them. But if you're just kind of like, oh, I'm casually interested in what you're talking about, don't buy it. It is a pretty heavy book in terms of content. So, and you know, as interesting as it is to an educator, to somebody who's trying to refine teaching methods, to the general population, you might feel like it's kind of a waste of your time because, you know, this doesn't directly affect you. Okay, so, oh no, we got a fat marker. Oop, hey, nice. Okay, so the problem of how we grade has always kind of plagued new teaching methods, especially because most of the time, as is the case with a lot of the stuff we've talked about in this entire book, teachers don't change anything. It basically keeps the exact same process as we go through from the old teaching method to the new teaching method. And then fundamentally, nothing changes because the students see through it. A lot of the older students won't care or will be like, I mean, this is the same stuff as before. I can see through what you're trying to do here. So there's kind of a lot of problems. And like I said, every new teaching method is kind of fraught with these particular problems of how do we get the students to buy into it? How do we get the teachers to buy into it? How can we do things that are different enough that are going to change how things operate in the classroom without at the same time making too much work for ourselves? And there's a lot of other issues going on there. Beer Vermi, good evening and welcome. Have a good lurk. I thought that had an echo thing. Well, that's frustrating. I need to get alerts going on a lot of these because there are some really interesting quotes and random things like that I want to stick in, audio files. Particularly from my favorite television show of the 1980s when I was, 6 or whatever, which was Square One TV. Square One TV is the source of the follow noise. So if you hear that, that is Math Man. When you insert a quarter into the arcade machine, that's the noise it makes, followed by the charge up of the theme music. Okay. So we'll go over how Peter says that we should... what Peter identifies as the problem with grading, and then how we can adjust it using all of the things that we've talked about before, and how to get the grading aligned with the thinking classroom's mentality. As always, it is something that's going to require a fundamental paradigm shift, and that is an actual thing, not just corporate buzzwords. We do actually have to shift the paradigm, i.e. change the entire method, change the entire thought process of what's going on. Alright, so quote. As mentioned in the introduction, thinking classrooms emerged out of my efforts to break away from institutional norms and find new practices that not only occasion thinking but also sustain thinking, particularly in but not limited to mathematics education. And again, this can be applied to other subjects as well. So if you are interested, or if you know someone who's interested in trying to do different methods, this might be something to look at. Other classrooms across my campus have been toying with various ideas which come very close to some of the ideas and ideals that are set forth in this book. But any one of them tends to fail and then tends to asymptotically approach where you just came from. So everything kind of goes back to normal, or approximately. Using all of the methods that are in here keeps the students off balance, and they're not able to settle into a routine, which then would bring them back to normal. Instead, they're shifted away from thinking the way they have been thinking. Constrained only by a set bell schedule and the four walls of a classroom, practices emerged that did just that. But no matter how much freedom we had to break institutional norms within the classroom, 3 to 4 times a year we still had to dock with the mothership and take all of the thinking and learning that was happening day to day in our thinking classrooms and report a grade. In this chapter, you'll learn how to do this in a way that not only honors work that students are doing in a thinking classroom, but also continues to push your students to think about their own learning. If you have implemented each of the thinking practices in chapters 1 through 11, you will be feeling a tension between how you are teaching and how your students, how you are teaching your students and how you are assessing them. Some of this tension should have been relieved by what was discussed in Chapter 12, Evaluate What You Value, and Chapter 13, Formative Assessment. But still, your students are spending much of their time in class learning in groups that individual tests may be beginning to feel disingenuous. At the same time, you may have students for whom your day-to-day subjective observation about what they're capable of does not align with how they perform on tests. If this is the case, then you are likely feeling some tension between how you're teaching and how you're grading. Your students are also likely feeling these tensions. One of the most enduring institutional norms over the past 100 years is that learning days should, at least in part, resemble testing days. This is why there has been such a pervasive drive in the history of education to have students work individually for at least part of every lesson. It's a rehearsal for the test. And students know this. If learning days are now full of collaboration, and if learning days are rehearsals for the tests, then why are tests still done individually? On many occasions in our research, students voiced exactly this question to researchers, and in some cases they asked it so profusely and vociferously of their teachers, it must be addressed. Rework that. So not necessarily groups. Yes, they're done in groups, but collaboratively. In order to resolve these tensions, you may have been toying with the idea of changing the way your tests look. You may be thinking about including collaboration in them in some way, shape, or form. Alternatively, or additionally, you may be toying with the idea of finding ways to grade some of the student learning that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis in the thinking classroom. The problem is that when you get to the point where you want to face these challenges in your grading practice, you face a new set of conundrums. If, for example, you move to using group quizzes or group tests, how do you distribute grades that a group receives among its individual members? If one member of the group does nothing, as is often the case with, the old way of doing things, and occasionally in building thinking classrooms, again, students will still, roughly speaking, be in the slack area. Now, the idea, and again, the ideal, is that it's going to be much less than that, much less than normal, but it is still going to be some. Pretty much any classroom you go into. Some students are not going to know and or not going to care about what's going on, and that's it. No matter how much you try to get them involved, no matter who you put them with in the entire classroom, some students will not know or not care what's going on. And it is unfortunate, but we do our best, at the very least, get everybody involved as much as possible. We could try to avoid some of that slack as much as possible. I did notice, naturally enough, in my higher level classes, i.e. usually the pre-calculus honors group through calculus, etc., all of the upper classes that I taught, differential equations especially, but, you know, calculus and above, pretty much everybody's there to work. And so, like, if you set a challenge in front of them, they're going to be much more interested in solving the challenge than trying to get out of doing work. Especially the ones who get it. The ones who know that, like, you know, life is going to be a series of projects. Life is going to be a series of, like, little challenges that are set before you, or even just a big, wide-open challenge that's set before you. You need to take control of whatever has been placed in front of you. You need to get it done. You're not going to be able to just rely on other people, because, you know, the boss is going to know that you had no hand in this. I am fighting the middle/tail end of a cold, so if I sound like I'm particularly low in my register, yeah, that's kind of what's happening. We've had a fun couple of days. That's also why I skipped stream last night, because I was just like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. Right? Likewise, if you get to a point where you want to record and honor some of the day-to-day work that you observe in a thinking classroom, how would you record that in your grade book? How would you merge it with your test grades? These are two different kinds of assessments, right? A random day-to-day, hey, you did a good job here, as an individual with your group, however it may have been done. Or something like you just sat down and you did a problem, like you worked on a challenge. How do you grade this? How do you get an individual's effort acknowledged? And again, in terms of grades especially. Even if you work in a jurisdiction where it's either suggested or required that you triangulate each student's performance using observation, conversation, and product, these suggestions or mandates are often not accompanied by practical suggestions for how to implement them. Tensions beget more tensions. Right, so this triangulated approach is, again, observation, conversation, and product. So again, some school districts will require this in terms of being fair to get a grade. The kids who are really good at BSing their way through a conversation still need to be observed to do stuff and also submit a product. Now, this product can be something like a test or a quiz or whatever. A conversation can be just you discussing with the student what they know and how they know it. And an observation can be just what you see in the classroom. How do they work with other students? How much work did they put in? How much effort did they put in? You are absolutely not wrong to feel this way. There's a need to assess students collaboratively as well as through day-to-day observations in a thinking classroom. This need is supported by contemporary thinking on assessment and evaluation. See, for example, O'Connor 2009 or Stiggins et al. 2006. Let's look those up while we're here. Since we're so close to the back of the book now. Oh, what? I mean, seriously. O'Connor. There we go. I was like, see, it's Connor. O'Connor 2009, How to Grade for Learning, also by Corwin, or published through Corwin. And Stiggins et al. 2006 is a Classroom Assessment for Student Learning, Doing It Right, Using It Well, Prentice Hall. So if anybody's interested in those, I will put I'll put that information in the YouTube info box. I'm not going to do any links or anything like that, but I will at least type out the articles that he has referenced, as is fair enough for the authors of these particular pieces. And again, this, I think, is going to hold the same caution that I said about Peter's book. If you're not somebody who's particularly interested in math education or changing your particular curriculum, don't buy it, but it might be something you can find at a library somewhere. In Maryland, we did have a nice request system that you could go to just about any library. Well, you could go to any library in the county. They will do an interlibrary loan between any other library in the county. And then if they have to request outside, you just pay a couple of bucks and it gets sent in. You can read your book and then send it back to your library, who then sends it back to, Washington, D.C. or wherever it may have come from. Canada in some of these cases, I'm sure. And the tensions you feel, the tensions that you feel exist, ultimately, are because you are trying to make sense of how your 21st century thinking about grading can fit into a 20th century grade book. Grading practices over the last 100 years could be seen as fitting into one of two paradigms. The point gathering paradigm and the data gathering paradigm. So generally speaking, right, your gradebook will always fit into one of these two categories, and generally speaking, it's only going to be one or the other, hence partitioned. It's, Some of your teachers may have had a more point gathering system and use some data gathering sprinkled throughout, and vice versa. But generally speaking, it's going to be partitioned into either one or the other and not the other.
Over 300 people were seriously ill with flu in our local hospitals. That's the equivalent of
Under the point gathering paradigm, this is the most enduring and most prevalent paradigm of the two. Peter calls it this because of the subtext that exists within the discourse in and around this particular practice. So the teacher says, don't forget there's a quiz tomorrow. The subtext is, tomorrow there are 20 points up for grabs, let's see how many you get. The teacher says, today we're reviewing for Monday's test. The subtext of this is, today I will be trying to help you get as many points as possible on Monday's test. The teacher says, this project is worth 20% of your final grade. Don't leave it till the last minute. The subtext is, I'm giving you a chance to get a lot of points. Don't lose any points by leaving it until the last minute, by procrastinating. In the point gathering paradigm, every point that a student manages to accrue is recorded in your gradebook. At the reporting time, you take the number of points a student earned, divided by the number of points they could have earned with possibly some scaling, and out pops a percentage. Within this paradigm, if a student receives a 0 on anything, it affects the denominator, but not the numerator in this calculation. And if a student gets any bonus grades, it affects the numerator and not the denominator. I refer to point gathering paradigm as event-based grading. Because of the way these points are recorded in the gradebooks, with the name of the event, i.e. quiz, unit test, project, and the date on which the event occurred. Oh. This was the dominant paradigm in the 20th century, and even now is the most common practice used in mathematics classrooms in North America and many places around the world. Events-based grading is appealing and popular because it produces an objective grade that is believed to be an accurate reflection of what the student has earned. Right, purports to be an objective measure of student learning, which then can also be thought of as students' ability to perform, essentially. The problem is that if the goal is to produce a grade that is reflective of what students have actually learned, then events-based grading is neither objective nor accurate. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines, in all seriousness, that is what he did. The word objective means expressing or dealing with facts or conditions as perceived without distortion by personal feelings, prejudices, or interpretations. Lou Romagnano argues in The Myth of Objectivity from 2001. that because we have relationships with our students built up over a year or multiple years, we cannot avoid our appraisals being distorted by our personal feelings, our prejudices, or our interpretations of their work, of the context in which they exist, all sorts of stuff. I'll give you an example of how you can know this is true. Assuming that you're currently using or have in the past used some form of event-based grading, when you hit the equal sign and perform and get the percentages calculated, do you look back across the row to see if the percentage for the student makes sense based on what they have gotten in the past? I'm willing to bet you do. Most of us, pretty much everybody, will do this at some point. We all have this subjective knowledge about this student built up over the course of the year, and we want to see if that subjective knowledge matches the objective truth of their percentage. If it matches, we feel good. Our subjective evaluation has been validated. But what happens if it doesn't? What do you do when you have a student that you know has been working very hard all term, doing extra work, coming in for help, etc., and they come up 1 percentage point below some particular threshold for a specific letter grade? Do you go back and play with the numbers a little bit and get the objective grade to match your subjective knowledge? If you do, you're implicitly recognizing the myth of objectivity. Even if you do nothing, but you feel bad about the misalignment between the objective grade and your subjective knowledge, you're going to grapple with the inherent flaws within the point-gathering paradigm. So this is something that I termed grade fixing. Whenever I was talking to my colleagues, there would inherently almost always be a little tiny bit of grade fixing at the end of the semester because you know that a particular student deserved a better grade. If they were, again, a point, half a point, quarter of a point shy, then you'd be like, all right.
Scraping ice off your windscreen with your credit card.
I know that the student deserved a better grade than this. Or, conversely, if a student really did not live up to the expectation of getting an A and had an 89.4, I might not cut them some slack if they were being a jerk about how they were doing stuff. Now, this did happen a lot less often. Most of the time, in my particular classes, I would be like, okay, look, if I were to raise everybody's grade by like 2%, would that look reasonable in terms of who I thought got what grade? And generally speaking, yes. So I'm willing to accept that my personal corrections, my personal feelings about subjective grading as I went through individual questions was inherently filled with some sort of error. So naturally, you go back and you say, okay, if everybody's grade were raised a certain amount, does that fix what I think is not quite right? And more often than not, it would be on an individual basis, but then I'd look over the entire class to make sure that everybody's grade looks right. Romagnano further argues this point by drawing on both first and second-hand data to show how inconsistent grading is on everything from a quiz all the way up to the SAT 1 mathematics test. This inconsistency creates what's called in the sciences a measurement error. For example, the measurement error on SAT 1 math is 30 points. This means that if a student scores a 470, we could say with 95% certainty that their score is somewhere between 410 and 530. That's a rather big measurement error, and it is on the SAT 1, one of the most tightly controlled assessments in the world. What then does this say about measurement errors on classroom tests? Assuming there are questions on that test where impartial credit is given out, there exists measurement error. To illustrate this, Romagnano presents a student's solution to a factoring quadratics question and discusses how a teacher might grade it. When he asks multiple teachers to grade the exact same solution out of 5, the responses are equally distributed between 2 and 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Equally distributed between 2, 3, and 4. This 40% quote from Romagnano, this 40% variation is attributable to judgments that individual teachers made about the relative importance of each aspect of the student's work described previously. In other words, these scores are subjective. So, scores are subjective. Everybody kind of knew that anyway. Objectivity is a myth, yet the myth endures. This is what Peter has come to call the tyranny of objectivity, which is the harm that we do with the points we have recorded for each student across a number of events. Believing the points we record in our gradebooks are objective, we then further believe that the sum of these points convey truth about what the students have learned. But as I pointed out above, that's also a myth. Ken O'Connor, 2009. That's the one we talked about earlier. Illustrates this best by positioning grading in the context of skydiving. My own version of which goes something like this. Based on these three graphs, whom would you want packing your parachute? All three of these people have the same average score. All three of them have the same median score. So, whom would you want packing your parachute? So, Peter says the obvious answer is, of course, Abigail. Although she was not good at the beginning, she showed steady improvement and is now consistently performing very well. Ironically, had the Skydiving Center treated these scores from a point-gathering perspective and provided us only with their final grade, again, all three employees would have had all the same grade. Because again, what we're dealing with in terms of point gathering is stuff like average, median score, whatever else you want. What O'Connor's trying to highlight with the parachute packing example is the difference between point gathering and data gathering. Whereas the point gathering approach would give parachute packers all the exact same grade, analyzing this information as data gives us a different understanding of what has changed over time. Okay, so if these three graphs that we saw earlier were data sets, not merely events, which again are put into a cumulative average, we would say that Abigail has improved over time. She has learned. Isn't this the objective of the entire course? Isn't this what we want from our students as well? More than that, Abigail has shown mastery. Her success as a learner and your success as a teacher should be recognized in her grade. The fact that she didn't know how to do something at the beginning is expected. She's learning, not learned, and shouldn't be punished for her early not knowing. So if we look at Ben and Charlie through a data gathering lens as well, we quickly discern that something tragic has happened to Ben. Partway through this unit. Possibly his parents got divorced, or his grandmother died, or he got caught up with the wrong crowd. The same could be said about Charlie. Her inconsistency is cyclic. What's happening? I taught a Charlie once. Her parents were divorced, and every 2 weeks she alternated whom she lived with. During the weeks when she lived with one parent, she performed much better in the weeks than when she lived with the other. The tyranny of objectivity that comes from a point-gathering perspective ignores the very human element of grading that are very clearly evident in Ben and Charlie's cases. We need to let the data talk to us rather than allowing points to rule us. The data show us where the learning is and where the problems are. Looking at this as data rather than points allows us to ignore early not knowing, ignore outliers, and fully acknowledge mastery when it occurs. The data gathering paradigm is more commonly known as outcomes-based or standards-based assessment. Also sometimes called evidence-based grading. Okay. And is widely recognized as a more accurate, fair, and relevant way of grading. So, where do we go with this? We're going to say that this data gathering method is going to be, again, So when we start looking at a thinking classroom, we need to start valuing the day-to-day evidence of learning that you are witnessing in your thinking classroom, and or that you wish to start evaluating students in groups. Then you're going to have to make some sort of paradigm shift. What you want to do is not feasible within the point gathering system. You're going to have to start using a data gathering system to get there. Whether you are just now ready to make this paradigm shift, or you made it a long time ago, the next challenge is how to capture data from all these different sources and record it in such a way that all observational data can be integrated with test data and group data can be integrated with individual data. In essence, the question we're trying to answer is, how do we know where the students are in their learning? If you remember from a while ago, where are the students and what direction are they headed in are the two key questions that we need to ask ourselves constantly whenever we're trying to figure out where students are and what they're up to in order to properly start assessing them. And also to make sure that they know where they are and where they're going. So, we already did this, as I said, and the answer for this chapter for grading ends up being essentially the same. We need to use an instrument that delineates learning outcomes and differentiates between complexity levels of any particular given task. Hey, wait a second, we already made one of those. Right? It's this thing. It's the rubric. These elegantly Hey Zach, how's it going? Welcome back in, and everybody say hi to Zach. This is at E to the 2i Pi here on Twitch. Yeah, caller, sorry. I gotta actually hang on. Control via OBS? Yeah, there we go. Hey. I'm gonna put it at -20. And let's see where it goes from there. It is quite possible that's now too quiet, but you know what? We'll deal with it later. Yeah, usually those blurb things are to wake me up. Boy. Okay. So these elegantly simple instruments will allow us to record all of our data in one place, whether those data come from observations, conversations, or tests, i.e. product. They are just data points on this table, and whether a data point comes from a student doing something individually or in a group, it's just a data point on the table. We don't need to wrestle with what part of the group grade should be assigned to each student, or how much partial credit somebody got on question 5 on a test. None of that matters. we're just gathering and recording data using the same 6 symbols that were used in the previous section, which again, just so everybody remembers and knows,
On January 2nd, over 300 people were seriously ill with flu in our local hospitals. That's the equivalent of 10 full wards. So this winter, our best chance of staying well is by getting a quick,
Oops,
simple
not
and
in.
free for many people, flu vaccination. Especially if you're older, pregnant, or have a long-term health condition. Children can be super spreaders, so get them vaccinated too. Check your eligibility and find your nearest vaccination centre at Let's Get Vaccinated.
Right, so like we did before, check
UK.
is
When forever finally ends, all the promises are broken. No more fights to pick up the pieces. I left you with the parts of me I don't wanna see you again. Don't wanna write any more of our stories.
right, the check markers reserved for students who have demonstrated knowledge individually and completely. The S is for silly mistakes, but otherwise correct. H is demonstrated individually with help. G is going to be demonstrated within a group, so something you observe just in the classroom. X is going to be attempted, but incorrect. And, you know, generally speaking, fundamentally incorrect. And N is not attempted. Now add to this subscripts. For context of which modality, I guess. Right, so you could end up with, let's see, do I have an empty one is a good question. Not really. Yeah, alright. So I'll take a couple of pictures and put them up on here. And then we can see precisely what it is that Peter's talking about in terms of the context. And we'll be back in roughly 3 minutes in order to take an ad break, let everybody get a drink, stretch, clear your throat of all the junk that's in there, or what have you. So we will see you all, like I said, in 3 minutes. Thank you so much for coming, and we shall return.
हिला सकता नहीं है कोई हम हराम करके नींदे इनकी मनमानी से सोई अरमान है लेनी और जमीन ना की अरमानी है बोई और जैसे हम करते बाबे ऐसा या करता नहीं है कोई क्योंकि शो के स्टॉप पर ठहरा दें दिक्कत ताकि तो कहना पे चादर और टांगे फैलाते और मजनू अपनी लैला के मैं हूँ डिमांड में आजकल जैसे सर पे सहरा है और जब भी देते हैं तो खाओ काफी गहरा दे you know it तेरा मैं पैंथर ZXC you know what it is
Welcome back from break, everybody. Nobody mentioned the random roll of duct tape on the floor. This room gets to be such a mess, unfortunately. Get the kids to pick up, and then they don't for a very long time. But joys and wonders of having children. Zach gets it. So, run through some Eskrima exercises. So, just to kind of limber up, we try to, as much as we can, get our wrists both forward and backward to go through as large of an arc as possible with the sticks. The sticks are an analog for 20, well, I think the whole length of the stick is 26 inches. So roughly speaking, this is on the order of a 24-inch machete. This is obviously not a machete. These are just supposed to be sticks. So, so with this, Eskrima was a Filipino martial art that was developed from some of the olden times before the Europeans came over and settled and colonized. A particular crime family was running most things in the Philippines, and they were hustling people for a lot of their money, and the people decided, you know what, we've had enough. And so they would often carry machetes back or to and from work. As they're coming home from work, they had been paid for the day, so rather than giving in to somebody trying to take away their money, steal their hard-earned money for the day, they would just they would have learned to defend themselves. So if they were carrying things on the ends of their machetes, they could then just drop all of the goods that were on them and then pull the machete straight out. There are both one and two hand variants of Eskrima. We do this often in we do the one hand variant often in our streams. We have a closed version where we start from this position and then end up with a strike position like this, and then we go back to closed. And then we also have the open position, which we usually do a closed strike and then drop to an open position like this. I'm trying not to drop the other stick off of my leg. And here we end up using our other hand as a stop to whip the machete around and also return it. In the two-handed variant, you have two weapons, so you are much more agile in terms of striking options. You're a little bit less able to deal with blocking unless you know how to parry with the weapon, which can also lead to potential problems, because oftentimes if you end up losing exactly where this thing is, it can come through and end up slicing your own leg open. Not a great prospect. In theory, if you know what you're doing, you won't do that. And also there's ways to then turn the weapon around and do something else very quickly with it so you get it away from your body. Typically, the two-handed variant starts with 45-degree angle strikes like this, going down and up. When we go down, we're bringing our wrist into it like this. This is where the blade of the weapon should be. And then when we come back up, we need to twist our arm back around so that the blade of the weapon is coming back up and through this way. And we return to our shoulder. And then we do the same on the other side. Oop. Yep. Keep them even. And if you get a nice little beat of music, it works really well to keep it kind of like with the beat. Or syncopated. From here we can also drop off of both shoulders and go into an up strike like this. Again, both hands have to be facing upward, and we end up doing a strike up. They cross and then come around our body, twist around, and then cross again, and then come back to our shoulders. And we try as much as we can. Ow. And we try as much as we can to keep them even so that we can put either arm on top and on bottom. We then can also come off of our shoulders forwards and cross. Again, same deal here. My left wrist really hates coming around like this, so unfortunately it doesn't end up doing this backhand thing very well. But move forward. This has a bit of an added benefit that if you're just standing here, the other person doesn't know that you're a master at Eskrima and they're threatening your life. You're holding two swords, so like they're in a very bad position. This is not very visible to go from here to here. It does not give the person a lot of time to react. Unlike if you were to drop them and come up, it's only about a quarter of a second, maybe half a second longer, but it's time. Unless they just think you're dropping them to get them off your shoulders in order to lose them, you know, whatever. You know, you say, the other person says, you know, drop your machetes. You might start with a drop like this and then step through. Right. Then we were talking about the other things that we could do. So generally speaking, we start from one side or the other. And then we have multiple strikes to go from here. We could, for instance, do a strike with a return. And that allows us to now be ready for another strike here or another strike here. So either of these will work. Generally speaking, we also follow this up. So there's going to be like a strike return here with another strike coming up. The full sticks to heaven move that we do is 3 total strikes together. It's a very easy combo. It's also a training exercise to do with a partner. So if you throw sticks forward, they will hit together at about here. And then you return, both of you return. You throw the stick up on your left, and it will hit probably about here. Twist and switch. And this will also hit right about here, and then return. And then you do the same on the other side. Hit, return, hit, swap, return. So this, generally speaking, sounds like clack, 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 clack. And it's very loud and annoys the neighbors. So in addition to Sticks to Heaven, there are multiple adaptations and moves that can be added to that. So one would be a 45-degree angle strike, followed by, rather than a simple return to the shoulder, you come up and around the head for a second strike with the same hand. So that would look like... And the reason that you might want to do a second strike like that is maybe they're expecting you to go here, and then start with this one. What they would not be expecting potentially is for you to go around your head like this into the back, and now they can't see where this is anymore. So if you roll it off your shoulder, that is an extremely hidden strike in addition to being very powerful, because now you've got all this momentum that you've just curled into your body is getting thrown out. We also have right, fan block. Generally this is from a closed position, so we'd start here, and the fan block is a backhand forehand combination up over the head. So you start with the backhand, switch to a forehand, and then we generally use this in combination with a another strike that I cannot think the name of, but literally I've been saying it almost every single stream. So what we're going to do is twist our hips and drop our weight, and then this is just going to whip around naturally. So we start from here, again, twist, drop the hip, and then let this whip around. So we use part of the fan block in other moves that start from here, since we're already sort of in a backhanded position. We can't really go this way. In theory you could, but that's also not a super great strike to go just straight across, or to do a backhand up like that. Not very powerful, doesn't use much in the way of muscles. However, if we go just for the forehand side from here, this is generally unexpected. It also kind of sneakily puts the stick slash machete up above your head, and the person, generally speaking, does not see it. And like rule number maybe like 4 or so of martial arts is try not to be terribly predictable. So you need to have a lot of different moves in your repertoire, know how and why they work, and when to use them. So there's a couple that come from here. One is using the second side of the fan block, just do the forehand, and then come across with the other, and then lead that into twisting the hip and dropping the body even further, and that allows you to do the second whip. So go here, and then we have multiple strikes that we can do from that side. Or we can just start with the sticks to heaven stuff again. We can also do this, followed by the forehand, which is more like a block rather than a strike. So by doing this, and then twisting into another strike, again, we're giving ourselves more options. We're allowing ourselves to understand how blocks work. And yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff we can do. Let's see. There was also one that starts from a strike. So rather than either going around the head or returning to the other shoulder, we could also do a strike followed by the left hand coming across while this one is coming back around our head and doing another 45-degree angle strike. So roughly speaking, it's going to look like that. Let's see. There's at least one other. I'm going to forget it for now. It's okay. Part of the problem is I haven't been back to the actual Eskrima class in like 2 months. Just timing has not worked out. We got other stuff going on all at the same time, so curse us for scheduling multiple events. Okay. Let me pull up Discord. I don't think that's gonna work. No. That definitely did not work. Okay, so we need to save both of these things. This is 1401. And 1402. Sorry, I haven't looked at any of your messages at all. How dare. With your sword skill, you're probably the one in danger. Yes. No offense. I will agree with your assessment. If only because, right, it is actually dangerous to have no real martial arts skill and use a martial art weapon. Okay. So, roughly speaking, you know what, let's go this way. That's fine. Yeah. Go like that. Okay. So as we can see here, we have the rubric. It says what the unit title is repeating patterns. What they need to do in this particular class is identify the core of a repeating pattern, transfer a repeating pattern, extend a repeating pattern, fill in the blanks in a repeating pattern, and create a repeating pattern for themselves, like without context. So, we said in one of the previous nights, you know, you would have an actual rubric with what the student needs to do in each of these things, or what the example of a particular question is for what is the difference between basic and intermediate, or basic, intermediate, advanced, for this fill in the blanks of a repeating pattern. And, you know, your students, again, have had some sort of say in, roughly speaking, what this looks like. Actually, that's not true. Right, the one that is a day-to-day, like, the student behaviors one, is the one that you want the students to have some sort of explanation of. No, not explanation. Some sort of say in creating it. The one that is the, you know, objectives of the course itself, you just want to have a solid handle on, like, what each of the parts need to be, so that you can demonstrate clearly what kinds of things belong in a basic, intermediate, or advanced context where appropriate. So like, what are we actually looking for? What do you expect of your students by the end of the semester? So if there is an intermediate or advanced version of transfer a repeating pattern, maybe it's not appropriate for this particular class. Maybe it is perfectly fine for the next grade level up, but you are not going to assess it in this class, so don't include it at all in your rubric. But this is the sort of thing that you might see for a student, Benjamin, in this particular class. So identify the core of a repeating pattern. In basic, we have check, check, S, check. So here we have a mark for he did something that was just a silly mistake, no real worries about it, but the other contexts that he got checks in were, it seems, some sort of assessment. So Peter's saying here that we're going to use subscripts anytime that we have a student getting a grade in a particular context that is not an assessment. So not something that is, generally speaking, a product. Me personally, I like to include all three of them, and I want my students to have a check in at least 2 of those 3 categories. So it's probably in here as well. I have not looked at the conclusion of this chapter in a while. Yes, so observation, conversation, and product. I want the students to have at least 2 checks in different contexts. If they can get 3, like this one, awesome. Good job. Looks great. But if it's one like this where it's just all individual checks, like, that just means that they produced something that showed that they have individual knowledge of this thing. That's good. I usually want to also double check by having a conversation with the student to make sure that they do actually understand it and they're not just following rote memorization. Okay. So, add the subscripts O and C for whether the data comes from an observation, check O, or a conversation, check C. Obviously, you can do whatever grades we have there. We see that there is a G sub O and nothing else. So the data can now come from day-to-day classroom evidence of learning. This is not to say it cannot also come from a test or quiz, but like the practice test in Chapter 13, a test or a quiz is no longer an aggregated instrument for which a single grade is produced. Rather, a test is a collection of discrete opportunities for a student to demonstrate their learning, and these demonstrations are recorded on the table in this disaggregated format. Once this organizer is populated with data, so we have the Benjamin one over here, you can use it to report out anecdotal comments, grades, or even percentages. For anecdotal reporting, the instrument easily and clearly helps you structure your comments. For the student whose performance is recorded below, you may say something like, Benjamin is able to identify the core of basic repeating patterns, but needs support to do so for more complex patterns. So we can see here, identifying the core of a repeating pattern, no problem with basic. Intermediate, we see growth, but he's not reaching where he needs to be for the intermediate check marks. And/or Benjamin is working toward being able to independently extend intermediate level patterns. And/or Benjamin has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to fill in the blanks in basic and intermediate patterns, but is still working on being able to do so consistently for advanced patterns. So this one right here, right? That's an interesting statement to make, right? Has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to fill in the blanks of basic, no problem, and intermediate. We see that at the end of the semester, or at least, 2 opportunities here, Benjamin has shown through observation, so a day-to-day classroom observation, Benjamin showed me on the board how to fill in the blanks of a repeating pattern. Cool. That's a check O. And then on some sort of assessment or on some sort of assessment, probably some sort of test, Benjamin got a check on filling in the blanks of a repeating pattern. So to me, again, as Peter says, this does say that he has made strides toward and completed the intermediate requirement. So here we saw that he made growth and now has demonstrated multiple attempts at this particular intermediate level of filling in the blanks. Here with advanced, he's still working toward it. We have a single piece of data, which is not necessarily going to be good enough to just say, yes, he understands it completely well. Does that mean that he should get the exact same grade as somebody who did not attempt the advanced level? Does he deserve the same grade as somebody who repeatedly showed advanced fill-in-the-blank pattern recognition? I would suggest that Benjamin probably belongs between those students. Right? If we only saw XG out of somebody in intermediate, I don't think that they should be getting the same grade as Benjamin. And likewise, if somebody has multiple check marks in advanced, I don't think they should be getting the same grade as Benjamin either. So, probably put it somewhere in between. But again, grades are subjective here. With mine, I was able to actually make a rubric and fill out the number of points that a student would get, either by just clicking the box or manually entering points. So if, for instance, we had maybe this one's 3 points, 1, 2, 3, Benjamin might get 2.5 here, right? Demonstrated once, didn't demonstrate multiple times or consistently. In create a repeating pattern, obviously a 2. That's perfectly fine. Benjamin repeatedly showed creating a repeating pattern at the intermediate level. Cool. Get a 2 here, a 1 here, a 1 here, and like a 1.3 or something, 1.2 at most. So again, grading is subjective. You got to figure it out for yourself. However it's going to work. All right. So Peter says, creating a grade. In order to turn these records into grades or percentages requires us to determine how a student has performed on each outcome and give that performance a numerical value. We found that in order to determine this value, we needed to follow 2 foundational principles. 1. Performance at the basic level is considered minimal attainment of the outcome. So in other words, if a student is basic throughout the entire class, they should get essentially a C. Basic level of attainment. So that should align with them getting a C for the entire class. I think that's actually what I did, is I didn't do 1, 2, 3. I did something like 3, 4, 5. So that basic ended up, if they got only basic throughout the entire class, they got a D, which is minimal attainment to not get an F. But generally speaking, students were not getting 60%, right? They were not getting basics and stopping. They were out there getting intermediates and advanced where possible, and some of those things didn't exist, right? The basic level was a 3. Well, for transferring a repeating pattern, 3's the maximum. So as long as you get the 3 out of that one, you're good. So let's take a look at that. If we look at this, right, what is Benjamin getting for this particular grade, for this unit, right? What is Benjamin going to get for my grading scheme? So basically, right, 3, 4, 5. This is out of 4. This is out of 3. This is out of 4. This is out of 5. And this is out of 4. So what do we get? This is 12 and 8. This is out of 20. Right, so what does Benjamin get? I'd say he gets a 3 for this one. He didn't really demonstrate that he was able to do it. Here he got help, and here he did it in a group. So it doesn't really count in terms of like getting a grade for it, unfortunately. Could it end up getting something? Sure, maybe. It all depends on how one approaches it. For this one, this is a 3, but it's out of 3, so that's good. Here, he also gets a 3. Again, consistently needs help. So, if we're going to be strict about the grading system, probably just a 3, maybe a couple of tenths in order to say, yeah, you know what, he's shown improvement. This one, we've got 3. Here we've got 2. So we're going to give full credit for 4. And then we'll also give a little bonus for the fact that he went there and got 1 check mark. And lower, got that one. So what's Benjamin going to get? For me, for my grading system, I'd say that this is probably a 4.5. This is a 4. This is going to be a 3, a 3, and a 3. Again, if I'm being strict about it. So what is this? This is going to be 9 and 8 is 17.5. So that's a 77.5. Which is a C, or C plus if you've got one of those. For me, I thought this worked pretty brilliantly. It also gives a visual representation for the students to know where they are and where they need to go to. This also was updated from me every time that we had some sort of assessment that was done. You got a test, you got a quiz, you got, we sat down and chatted for a half an hour. Great, that's a conversation check. For a half an hour, it might have been on 3 different topics. It all depends on where the conversation goes. And again, part of the grade at the beginning of the semester was one assignment that was come and talk with me for half an hour about just stuff. So not particularly I need help on something, but just chat. And if somebody didn't do it, they could still make it up during the semester by just coming in a lot. And just through natural conversation, we keep talking about, what's going on in your life. How are you doing? I noticed you missed class the other day. You doing okay? Okay, so that's number one.
I'm sorry that I stole your car. Ain't got those tattoos on my arms that don't mean shit to me. Maybe you should pull the alarm, so I don't take it way too far. Die before I'm 23. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry,
So again, a student should be able to pass your class with all basic grades. So don't rig it such that it is mathematically impossible to get all basic grades and fail. Like I said, with what I've got there, if it's all 3s, 4s, and 5s, students are generally speaking going to be getting all of the basics pretty quickly. They're going to get, sprinkling of the intermediates, and there will be very few topics in general that will have advanced. Okay. And 2. The different levels of attainment, basic, intermediate, advanced, are backwards compatible, meaning that if a student can demonstrate attainment at advanced, then it is assumed that they have already attained the basic and intermediate levels, and therefore do not need to demonstrate the basic and intermediate if they have attained advanced. So they need to be wholly subset, right? This is going to be important. Basic needs to be a subset of intermediate, which needs to be a subset of advanced. And proper subset, so that there is potentially something that can be done at each of these particular levels, which is not included in the previous one. So I don't want to see any lines underneath, which means that they could be exactly the same size. No. In order to do intermediate, they need to do something above and beyond basic, and in order to do advanced, they need to do something above and beyond intermediate. I mean, that should be pretty obvious based on making the rubrics in the previous section, but nonetheless, we'll let that go. In this system, adhering to the first principle results in the demonstration of basic level being worth 2 points for what Peter did. Intermediate worth 3 and advanced worth 4, with the understanding that a 50% total will pass this class. Adhering to the second principle means that the number of points a student receives for a particular outcome is determined by the highest complexity level they demonstrate. And I guess consistently demonstrate is important. Again, dealing with the one that I did over there, with the, they got a single check, so therefore 4.5. Sounds reasonable to me. Maybe another teacher will have a completely different idea about how that should be graded. But, as always, context is important. So if I go through, and that's the final exam. So Benjamin showed me on the final exam that he can do the advanced level of fill in the blanks of a repeating pattern. He's only getting 1 check mark. That's not possible to get more check marks, because this is it. This is the final exam. You know, there won't be another opportunity. You've given him ample opportunities throughout the semester to show improvement, to come in and talk with you, to do observations in class. Just didn't quite make it. Again, he does not technically deserve the 5, but if you're like, you know what, you did really well, and if we had like, if you came in and talked with me during office hours, you probably would have gotten that extra half a point. Okay. Right, adhering to the second principle, grade on that particular outcome is determined by the highest complexity level demonstrated, irrespective of what it says at the lower levels. So this is also an interesting thing, right? If, for instance, we reverse, if we reverse these two, so that extending a repeating pattern at the basic level, Peter did not answer it twice and then only could answer it with help, but at the intermediate level didn't answer it the first, or got it wrong the first time, and then showed me 3 further times that he did in fact understand this, means that Peter will be getting a 3 on this particular objective, no matter what. That is 100%. 3 out of 3, 100% on that objective. Again, despite the fact that the highest grade at basic was a help, with help. Right, so as mentioned earlier, this shows they have learned, and their learning and your teaching needs to be acknowledged and celebrated. The bigger question is what it means to demonstrate attainment with certain complexity level. To answer this, we ran several experiments where we compared an individual student's assessment data recorded in instruments like these to their teacher's subjective impression gleaned from day-to-day observations and conversations of the same student. We did this with over 40 teachers and hundreds of students. What we were looking for was correspondence between data and subjective impressions. In particular, we were looking for the quantity and quality of data that was necessary for there to be a correspondence. We learned that there was a delicate balance between too little and too much data. For example, Benjamin demonstrated attainment at the advanced level only once. That corresponded with the teacher's subjective assessment that that student's attainment level is less... subjective assessment that that student's attainment at the advanced level was less than 60%. Conversely, if performance at the intermediate level was demonstrated 5 times, like the create a repeating pattern, the last one, it corresponded with the teacher's subjective assessment 100% of the time. Oh. Right, never mind. I gotta go back. If on this one, right, we had the fill in the blanks repeating pattern, the advanced was only demonstrated once. If we said, yes, the student gets it, with one single check mark, and the teacher was asked subjectively, what do you think about this particular student? The correspondence between the single check mark saying yes and the teacher's assessment of their abilities corresponded less than 60% of the time. There we go. So, 2 positive data points in a row were sufficient to match the teacher's subjective assessment of a student, provided that 2 positive data points were consecutive. Whereas check check was enough to show attainment, check X check was not. I here, even with this S in the middle, I would say that this student's level of attainment is solid basic. Right? Yes, I know that they were inconsistent with the last couple there. They made a silly mistake. I'm not going to dock them points based on that. I'm not going to say that that's a 2.8 or a 2.9. I will give them the 3. Mostly because they've demonstrated multiple times. And yes, it wasn't the last 2, but you know what? Close enough for me. And again, it's subjective. So look at it in terms of the subjective grading. Does it make sense for what your impression is? Alright, so with check X check, we could see that clearly the student did not get it. And there was a sufficient there was sufficient data to suggest that the student did not have it, because they got that X. And, importantly, more data should probably be required. So if we take this all together and look at, so I've got another one with a, I should have taken a picture of this one too. So we have here Alicia's performance on the fractions unit, and yeah, I'm just gonna have to do it because it's yeah.
Learn how Spotify can add more to your mix at ads.spotify.com.
And this, kids, is why you prepare your assessments ahead of time. Not just assessments. Prepare your materials ahead of time. That one, yes. Send it. (14-03). So according to what Peter said earlier, right, does this make sense? What we see here is that Alicia has a solid basic understanding of definitions for fractions, right? 2 out of 2. No problem. Got it. And no argument either, right? Those are the only 2 grades. They're both check marks. Cool. You're good. And again, Peter's doing this as 2, 3, and 4. So going down this list, now we have, yes, she's got the basic level. Yes, she's got the intermediate. Yes, she's got the advanced. Cool. We're going to say, yes, she has advanced. And I mean, realistically, all I'm going to look down is this column here first to say, does she have 2 check marks in a row at the end of her advanced? And the answer here is yes for all of these. I do not see that for solve contextual problems involving fractions. I see the 3 here. I do not see check marks recently in the advanced. So this is why Alicia's only going to get a 3 here. And in this particular case, right, there is no 2. So solving contextual problems makes sense that there is no basic. You're going to have some questions that are going to be a bit harder. here, this is why Alicia's going to get the 29 out of 30 instead of the full 30 points, and we don't have any other issues. I do kind of wish that he would do something like comment on this one, and he might very well have commented on this, but I do wish that one of the top things did include one that looked like, you know, XN check S, because here you could see she's made progress. She would not deserve top grade for XN check S, but again, in my opinion, probably a 3.5 if the 4 was not complete. Okay. She's demonstrated attainment on every outcome level on the second one, right? Add and subtract proper fractions. Checks all the way across. She's obviously got a 4. We're good. For the next 3 outcomes, she also receives 4s, and although she had a rough start for all of these, in the end she demonstrated mastery at the advanced level. Same is true for the 6th outcome. Solve order of operation tasks. Even though she didn't demonstrate mastery of the earlier stuff, she still demonstrated mastery of the advanced stuff, and therefore that supplants the other 2. So for this outcome, we can ignore all of the early not knowing that Alicia demonstrated and celebrate the fact that she learned it in the end. On the 7th outcome, her performance is rather inconsistent. Contextual problems. Even though she has shown that she can, from time to time, answer advanced level questions, her highest level of attainment demonstrated is at intermediate, so therefore she earns a 3. If these data were collected prior to reporting cutoff, you may wish to go gather some more data on Alicia for this outcome, and evidence that is in this particular thing may actually be a result of such efforts. For the last outcome, she again had a rough start, but of late has been performing well and receives 4 points. Taken together, Alicia is awarded 29 out of 30 points for this unit, which can be translated to a percentage, a letter grade, or a level depending on what your reporting style is. With all this assignment of points, you may be wondering if we're going back to the point gathering paradigm. The answer is no. We're not doing the exact same thing as we were doing before. There's no gathering of points. There is only an analysis of the data post hoc rationalization. The results of which are recorded as points only at a time mandated for reporting out. Until that time, the data live as data. If you're fortunate and work in a jurisdiction where reporting out is by spreadsheet, then a cleaned up version of this table would be sent home, indicating level of complexity Alicia has achieved for each outcome. Comments, etc., would be included also. Incidentally, had we been recording Alicia's progress through a point gathering paradigm, she would have collected 35 out of 67 points, which would have translated to a much lower grade on her report card. Alicia is an extreme case, but in our research we did this type of comparison for students in many different classrooms. In essence, what we did was take test and quiz data that teachers had recorded in an events-based gradebook and transpose them into instruments similar to those in figures, above. And then we gave these anonymized grids back to that student's teacher and asked the teacher to decide what they believed this student deserved. In approximately 80% of these cases, the teacher awarded a grade that was 10 to 15% higher than they had originally awarded through their event-based gradebook. The reorganization of points into data allowed teachers to let go of outliers and early not knowing. So again, did the students learn the material eventually is what you really ought to focus on, not worried about all the earlier stuff. Yes, thank you, Zach. And I was so concentrated on doing that that I didn't even notice that you typed it in. Sorry. So I imagine you probably typed that before I said it. All right. We'll come back in 3 minutes. We'll do the last bit that's here, and then we'll do the wrap-up on this particular section, including the FAQ and... wow, okay. FAQ for this section is really long. And then we'll do our discussion questions at the end. So, see you back in 3 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and be right back.
Calling all spinners. Join Sky Vegas, the online casino, where we offer new players 50 free spins to use in your first 7 days, and 200 more when you deposit and spend £10 within 30 days, all with no wagering required. You love a good spin? We love a good spin. Sky Vegas. Play. It's why we're here. 18 plus free spins loaded on first eligible game. Game and eligibility restrictions and further T's and C's apply. BeGambleAware.org.
On January 2nd, over 300 people were seriously ill with flu in our local hospitals. That's the equivalent of 10 full wards. So this winter, our best chance of staying well is by getting a quick, simple and free for many people flu vaccination. Especially if you're older, pregnant, or have a long-term health condition. Children can be super spreaders, so get them vaccinated too. Check your eligibility and find your nearest vaccination centre at letsgetvaccinated.co.uk.
It's such a pain to close my eyes. I'm falling in this deep immerse.
Righto. Welcome back. Oh. Something went wrong. Something's wrong. I am not getting... Y'all still here? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, now you show it. Thanks. Okay. And yes, this one does include some extra little bits. Bring forward. There you go. Nope. Cool. Never mind. We gotta leave it there, because that's where that thing is. Right. So, yeah, this includes some bits and bobs on my desk. Also, I say bits and bobs now. Right, so with Jennifer's performance, this is a little bit different. So, looking at Jennifer's performance, using the points gathering system, Jennifer would have received 28 out of a possible 76 points. Which results in an utter failure, right? This would be an absolute F, no matter what grading system you're doing. Again, Alicia would have gotten 35 out of 67, which is near enough to a 50%. Pretty bad. This one's a bit different. Oh, sorry, this is the same rubric. But looking at Jennifer's performance, right, we have here a conversation and a assessment of some kind that have gotten a check each. We got 2 that have checks here, 1 conversation, 1 observation. We have here 3 check marks in a row, looking consistent. Coming down to this one, we've got 2 check marks in a row. Down to this one, we've got 3 check marks in a row. Right. Okay, this is actually what I wanted to discuss. So Peter has given her a 2 here, showing a basic level of attainment, and he's going to comment. Here we do have a 4, and here we have a 3. Right, I also did not crop this particular picture because I just took it in Discord rather than trying to take the picture, upload it to Discord, and then do the thing. Either way, took a long time because apparently my phone was not connected to Discord for some reason, despite being in the app. I don't understand. Okay. So, the 28 out of 76 will result in a failing grade, regardless of what kind of scaling is applied. Obviously, you're not going to scale some students over 100% in order to just make sure that Jennifer doesn't fail. This will result, in a data gathering system, however, Jennifer receives a 22 out of 30, which is a pass in some jurisdictions, may result in a B or even C+. C+, or even a B. There are 2 main reasons that contribute to the disparity between the possible grades. One is that the amount of data or points gathered at the complexity levels that she was just not going to achieve in the first place. A total of 23 data points exists at the advanced level in outcomes 2 through 7. Point gathering system repeatedly punishes Jennifer for not being able to do things she just can't do yet. But given enough time, would be able to do it. The data gathering system will ignore those.
But advertising on Spotify can help your business turn up the volume. With our easy-to-use ads manager, you can create new,
or at least you're still not getting, really high scores on, or you're not missing out on a huge number of points. And that's kind of the point, right? We're only missing 1 to 2 category points for each of these being, missing. Right, the category points, again, if we start at a 2, the category points, if we start at a 2, right here, there was no 2 to be had here. So even if you attained the minimal level in all of the categories, now it's not guaranteed at the intermediate if a person is going to, if they only score basic, right, then they just don't get the one that goes to intermediate only. But in this particular case, right, this would be like, what if we did a 2, a 2, a 2, a 2, a 2, a 3, nope, wrong one, a 2, a 3, and a 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is 14, 17. So this would be a 17 out of 30 must pass. Regardless of exactly how you're doing it. Jeez. I was in the middle of typing my passcode when it was like, oh, I got your face now. Alright, a 17 out of 30 is a 56.6%. Right, or 56 and 2/3. Right, so if we want this to be scaled up to a 60 or 0.6, because that's like the minimum grade that your students need, then what is it that we need to multiply by in order to get that? I mean, hang on. Nope, that's not it. Da, 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 da. What, 18/17 times 0.56 repeated? Yep. So if you multiply by 18/17 to literally every person's grade, then you will get a reasonable approximation of what they should get in terms of a percentage score. Now, the people who get all fours except the basic 2 there, obviously you're not going to multiply theirs, but it'll at least be a reasonable approximation of a grade scaled into the correct amount. Okay, so level 1, or the first reason that the disparity exists between Jennifer's 2 possible grades, again, the point gathering system just repeatedly punishes her for not getting the top level, rather than being able to only be a couple of categories, 1 or 2 categories away from top marks in all of this other stuff. Again, if you are at the basic level, if you are at the basic level, you should have a passing grade. So again, 17 is a pass. So what is a 22? I should have done this, but nope, don't do that. 22 out of 30 is a 73.3, so that's pretty solidly a C. And if we multiply that by 18/17, it is now a 77.6, which is either going to be a C or a C plus, depending on how your grading works. At my college, it was A, B, C, D, F. That was it. So this would be pretty solidly still a C. A person with a, let's say, 24 out of 30 would have gotten an 80 directly. So that would put them up to almost an 85. Person with 23 would get a 76.6. And if we multiply by 18/17, this gets them an 81.2. So here, if somebody does get a 23 out of 30, they might end up getting either a B or a C, depending on how you're doing this. If you're just taking the raw grade, 22 out of 30 is a C, 23 out of 30 is a C, 24 out of 30 is a B. That's your grading system. if you say, well, 17 needs to be a pass, so 17 needs to be a 60%, and then kind of scale everything up, then a 23 is a B, and a 22 is still going to be a C. Again, grading is subjective. It's kind of your business how exactly you work this out. Honestly, as long as nobody's in the like kind of danger zone of like, well, they could be this grade if I do it one way, or they could be the other grade if I do it the other way, then none of this matters. It's a moot point. But if you do have somebody who's on the bubble, if you will, which is a common phrase at my college, certainly. Somebody whose grade is between the two, or right on the edge of the two, then you may have to make some sort of determination. Okay. The extent to which Jennifer's teacher was willing to look for evidence of Jennifer's learning is a second reason why this distinction may exist between the two grades. When she found areas that Jennifer was not performing well on, she worked with her, H, had conversations, G, and tried it on her own and tried to observe, O, when she was solving tasks on her own or in groups. You might go out of your way to look at this particular student and say, look, they don't have this intermediate level, but we're doing an intermediate level today. We're doing something that they are missing today. So I will watch this student, along with probably 3 or 4 others, and concentrate on them. In addition, they're also going to be looking, the teacher will be looking at the groups to say how the groups are doing with the particular objectives that have been put up back from, what was that, chapter 8? Nope. Where's the rubrics? Man, was it all the way back in 6? Nope. Yes, okay. Yeah, chapter 12, the one with the rubrics. Jeez. Oh, I knew it wasn't that far back. So yeah. As from chapter 12, we're going to evaluate individual groups based on what the student objectives were. What are we looking at for today? Is it going to be, the perseverance of a particular 3 groups? Is it going to be the ability for certain groups to work together better? Again, you're only going to be evaluating 3 groups on group behavior. And those are based on how students are interacting and what they decided the focus should be on. In addition, you as the teacher are going to be focusing not only on the group dynamics, which can be done in a few minutes as long as you notice those things. And again, at the end of class, you're asking them, how do you think you did? Mark up your papers, and then you hand out the ones that you prepared for those three groups. But then you also pay attention to what the students are doing who need this data gathered. Yeah, sure, you're going to capture some incidental other stuff. And like the way that I had it, it was in the Canvas app. And so like I would just go to this particular assignment, which is their like final rubric grade. I would go to their final grade and I would put in notes for any individual things that I just happened to notice. And once I put in notes on a particular thing, I'd hit enter, and then I'd grab a drag down menu, and I'd just go to a different person. Whoever I noticed next was doing something. I go ahead and pop into theirs and say, okay, this person was doing this. How we doing? And just keep moving. Keep cycling through. Keep trying to find students who are doing stuff. Okay. There are 15 instances where Jennifer's teacher gathered data through conversation or observations. So 15 individual subscripts that you can see there, C or O. This is still time intensive, and she doesn't need to do this for all of the students. Many of them already got whatever grade they've got from assessments, and that's all they need to get. Look over at Alicia's, right? We've got a whole bunch of grades that don't have subscripts on them. In fact, none of them have subscripts on them. So Alicia did not have any conversations or observations according to this data. And, I mean, honestly, rightfully so. Alicia seemed to have a handle on it. The only thing she didn't get by the end of the semester was this contextual problems thing, which, you know, I don't think this is a cause for concern. If I were the department head and I noticed this and I'm well versed in building thinking classrooms, I might be like, oh, you know, might be just something to keep in mind next time you're doing this. Maybe a couple little side conversations just to make sure you don't have to, like, take down the notes or anything like that, but you know, like, was there any particular evidence you were looking for from her? And the answer could be no. And again, she got a 29 out of 30. That's an A, so good job. And also, it seems like, right, based on the data that we find here, it seems like Alicia does not have a handle on it. So, there wasn't much that we could do in that particular case. And likewise, Jennifer needs a lot more help. Okay. Most students will be like Alicia. Most of the data will come from more formal assessments like tests or quizzes. But if you have students like Jennifer, students for whom you may need to spend more time, this data gathering approach, coupled with the instruments presented in this chapter, allows for this concentration on trying to get this particular student to get, in effect, right, it's going to get them a higher grade. But again, what we should be focusing on is getting them to attain higher levels of mastery.
On January 2nd, over 300 people were seriously ill with flu in our local hospitals. That's the equivalent of 10 full wards. So this winter, our best chance of staying well is by getting a quick, simple and free for many people flu vaccination. Especially if you're older, pregnant, or have a long-term health condition. Children can
Right,
be super
focus on the
spreaders, so get
Jennifers
them
of the
vaccinated
class.
too. Check your eligibility and find your nearest vaccination centre at letsgetvaccinated.co.uk.
Get them the attention they need. Go through your rubric essentially every class day and have a pretty good handle before class on who needs what kind of attention. What opportunities are you giving them today? Okay. These improvements, in concert with those created by the changes presented in Chapter 13 with the formal assessment, resulted in fundamental transformation of student performance in the thinking classroom. Not only do students know where they are and know where they're going, but teachers also have a clearer and cleaner picture of where students are vis-a-vis the expected outcomes of a particular curriculum. And when students know as much as you do about where they are and where they're going, an interesting thing begins to happen. They start thinking about their learning rather than their grades. As they do so, grading becomes a byproduct of learning rather than the objective of learning. Alright, this is the big takeaway from pretty much the entire book, but honestly, this last chapter especially. If you can lay out the gradebook and tell students that they now have opportunities to improve their mastery rather than worrying about individual grades and things like that, then they will start focusing more on understanding their learning rather than trying to get grades. Alright, FAQ section. If anybody else has any questions, please type them into chat, and I will attempt to answer them the best I can. You mentioned that there was a 10 to 15% increase in the grades of 80% of the students. Why only 80%? Some of the 20% of the students for whom this did not make much of a difference were already at the top of the class. This is not to say that they won't improve in this paradigm shift, they just can't improve 10 to 15%. They already got A's. The rest of the students for whom this shift did not make any difference defy description. It just turns out that the particular distribution of their data tells the same story in either paradigm. I was probably one of those students, and I was pretty consistently a B student. in most of my classes in high school. Isn't this just a type of grade inflation? I mean, decent question, but no, not at all. By shifting to outcomes-based assessment, you avoid both the myth and tyranny of objectivity and start to give grades that are more accurately a reflection of what your students have actually learned. Adherence to event-based grading, if anything, is a form of grade deflation. I work in a setting where the basic level of attainment is deemed to be equivalent to 60 or 70%. How do I show that? The easiest way to do that is to change the values of the 3 columns from 2, 3, 4 to 3, 4, 5, like I did, or 5, 6, 7. This will position the basic level of attainment at 60 or 71%, respectively. So in my class, if I set the rubric at 3, 4, 5, generally speaking, I would be getting very similar to what we showed here. Right. This would be a 17 point... No, that was her grade. Sorry. The basic level of attainment here was just 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So that's going to be a 15 out of 20. Sorry. I reach for my calculator. Just stop it. Is a 75%. So nope, that's a... yeah, that's true. So for this sub-rubric, right, this is not the entire course, but for this sub-rubric, the minimum grade that a student could get is going to be a 75%, as long as they attain basic levels for all 5 objectives. So, it works in terms of that. Then we just have to check versus the rest of the rubric all the way down. Does it also manage to get the students at least a 60%, which for me, at my college, meant that the student is passing, but not recommended to move on. And realistically, it probably got them a little bit higher than a 60%, like 65, 68, something like that. It depends on the class. But just check it against your rubric, against your grades. What is the minimum that a student can earn in all of the categories of basic? If they cannot earn a basic, so for instance there is only an intermediate grade like this one here, what is the minimum that a student could earn only getting basic, and so they miss the intermediate here, right? So this would be a 14 out of 30. So would a 14 out of 30 be acceptable to pass? And that all depends on your determination and your department chair's determination. Is a 14 out of 30 acceptable to pass? And then what does it mean to pass?
It's on Prime. I'm Professor Huggington, and I like to hug. Cut-off times and T's and C's apply. See product page when ordering.
Okay. I work in a jurisdiction where we have to report out on students' demonstrated ability to solve knowledge questions, application questions, and thinking questions, all separately. How do I use a data gathering system to do that? Knowledge, application, and thinking, like basic, intermediate, advanced, are backward compatible. That is, for example, if a student can do a thinking question around multiplying two-digit numbers, they must also have the knowledge to do so. Anytime you have 3 complexity levels that are backward compatible, then you can apply the data gathering system as presented in this chapter, relabel them instead of basic, intermediate, advanced into whatever it is that you're supposed to label them into, as long as, again, doing this one is sufficient to prove the other 2. And also, right, doing the middle one is sufficient to prove the lower. In the example you provide, all of the outcomes are weighted the same, but not all outcomes should be weighted the same. How does this work when you're trying to generate a grade? So, in Jennifer's case, it's not actually all weighted equally, but there are some that... Oh. Never mind. Yes. Okay. All of these objectives are weighted the same across. So the basic level is always given a 2, intermediate is always given a 3, and advanced is always given a 4. But do we think that some of these should be weighted differently? If you think some of the outcomes should be worth more than the others, then you can add a scaling factor to them. So, for example, if you think that definitions, outcome 1, are only worth 1 point, then set it that way. Likewise, if you believe outcomes 7 and 8 solve contextual problems involving fractions and estimate solutions for problems involving fractions should be worth 8 points, then you could just double them. Make them 4, 6, 8 going across, which again, solve contextual problems would be just 6, 8. Alright, the easiest thing to do is still evaluate them out of 4, and then just double. The total for the unit would be out of 37 rather than 30. In the example you provide in these 2 figures, at least I think, right? 14, 6, 14, 7, yeah. In these 2 figures, all of the data are seen to be equally weighted. I don't think that should be the case. Do I want the value test data? I want to value test data more than observational data. How do I do that? This is your prerogative, but I caution against blindly privileging some data over others across all students. This needs to be done on a student-by-student basis. When you wish to do this, I agree it would be important to be able to see differences in the data. This can be accomplished in 2 ways. One, you could color code your data such that one color is used for tests and quizzes, one for observations, and one for conversations, etc. The second method is to split each cell into 2 rows and record test and quiz data on one row and all other forms on the other. I feel like this way of grading will take more time. Is that the case? Nope, not at all. It is true, however, it takes a bit more time to record the data than in point gathering gradebook, but this is made up for by 2 time savers. First of all, you are no longer grading with partial credits, which saves a lot of time. So, for instance, the part where I was like, oh yeah, I give him like a half a point here or something like that, he's just saying, no, don't do that. Me, I guess I'm just nice. Or something. Second, you end up grading less overall. When we map the data from the event-based gradebook to a grade similar to the ones that were on these tables and give it back to the teachers, every teacher made the same comment. Wow, I have way too much data. And it was true. There were a lot of redundant data, most of which represented unnecessary grading. In a data gathering paradigm, you collect fewer data points and only use the data that you need to fill in the missing information for a particular grade. So again, like Alicia's here, it's pretty obvious, given the data that's been shown, she doesn't have solving contextual problems involving fractions because her most recent grade is an X, which means that she has a fundamental misunderstanding. There was never a point where she had 2 checks in a row. So it seems pretty obvious she does not deserve the 4 for those 2 reasons. And there are 2 reasons why she doesn't deserve the 4. So it makes sense to only give her a 3. In Jennifer's, we see that there are 2 check marks in a row for all of these, with the exception of solve order of operation tasks with proper and mixed fractions, where she has 2 checks and 1 S, splitting them. Peter is still giving her full credit for that. And again, if this is what you think she deserves, because she has at least, from the conversation, oh, you understand it, you just made a silly mistake, no problem. We'll still give you the credit for that particular box. Does this mean that I may not grade every item on a test? Yes. If, by the time a test is taken, a particular student only needs to show you evidence of being able to do the advanced type of questions, those are the only ones you need to grade. Indeed, that particular student should know that those are the data you're looking for and may choose only to do those questions on the exam. So Alicia goes into the final with this grade. If Alicia goes into the final with this rubric that we see right here in 14.6, figure 14.6, as says right there, then the only thing she needs to do, if at all, are going to be these solve contextual problems involving fractions. She knows she's going into the exam with an A. She needs to take the exam, probably because that's a requirement for your, the school district or whatever. But honestly, like, if this were a college and Alicia's in my class, she's not even looking at the fraction section. Maybe she's going to solve contextual problems involving fractions, and that should be labeled on the particular questions that pertain to this. And again, those students should know what questions they need to get done. You are giving them opportunities to show off, basically, at the end. And if it turns out that there are some questions that are like, oh, well, this particular question is an opportunity to show me solving contextual problems involving fractions and also multiplying and dividing proper fractions and also adding and subtracting proper fractions. Then great, it'll include all of those. You just have to go ahead and say that sort of stuff ahead of time. So, as mentioned, a test is no longer an aggregated event, but a convenient venue for gathering data on a variety of outcomes at a variety of complexity levels. That's it. You've just got a few problems here. You want people to work on them, to show off. Show me what you know. I want my students to show off. It's a great way to do it. Does this mean there will not be a grade at the top of the test when it's returned to the students? Correct. As mentioned, a test is no longer an event. Rather, it is a collection of opportunities to test collection of opportunities for students to evidence their learning. The data from the test live in a disaggregated form in your instruments and the students' navigation instruments. It is only aggravated into a grade when you've analyzed the data and you come to the end of the term. Again, for me, what this meant was I would go through their individual rubrics for the end of the semester, and I would just update where they are, and they know where they're going based on what they're missing out of that rubric. So we'd have individual students who would look down at this particular instrument and see a number that was like, 5 out of 30 after the first few days or weeks of the class. They'd be like, oh my god, I've got an F because it's a 5 out of 30. No. No. You do not have an F. You have an F if you quit right now and stop doing work. Throughout the rest of the semester, you have the opportunity to show off. Show me that you've done the rest of the work for the rest of this sub-rubric. Again, this is not going to be the only thing out of the entire exam or whatever. Essentially, what I had was each individual unit was listed as a test item. And so they go into each unit, and then by the end of the unit exam, that would go live and actually report the grade. But before that, they knew what they had completed and what they hadn't, how many points they had out of however many points were required, or, out of whatever the total points were. So in theory, they could see their individual grades on the individual assignment, but it wasn't weighted into their actual grade until after the exam and after my calculation of all their grades. So if every student has already evidenced attainment for every outcome at every level, do they need to take the test? No. Or, alternatively, if you have a student for whom you already know the test will not give an accurate measure, you may just choose to let them avoid it and base your grades solely on observations and conversations. I have students who are operating at a much lower level than the others in the class. How does this method of grading help me? If you have a student that is working on demonstrating their abilities on the basic level for every outcome, then only give them the basic level page of the test. If they complete it, ask them if they want the next level. And then so on and so forth. This means that you need to set up your test to allow this to happen. So reorder your questions instead of being, here's question 1, 2, 3 as basic, intermediate, advanced of definition, or adding and subtracting proper fractions. You're going to set it up as, here's a page of all basic stuff. Here's a page of all intermediate stuff. Here's a page of all advanced stuff. I've heard many teachers who are doing thinking classrooms do group tests. How does that work? How group testing looks can be varied. Some teachers make all quizzes group quizzes. Some teachers allow students to collaborate for select questions on a test or even the entire test. This collaboration can be on whiteboards or at desks and can result in a single test being produced by a group, or after collaboration, each student writing and submitting their own test paper. Any and all of these combinations are great. They substantially reduce student anxiety and the value of collaborative work that happens day to day in a thinking classroom. And inside of a data gathering paradigm, it's easy to record it as group effort, G, and make sense of at reporting time. Should I count data gathered in groups, G, as equivalent to data gathered individually? Check. That's up to you. Most teachers would view success in a group followed by success individually, i.e. G check, as equivalent to successive individual successes. Check, check. There is no contradiction here. However, if you have a positive group performance followed by unsuccessful individual performance, GX, there's a strong indicator that more data is needed before you can say with any certainty that that individual attainment has been achieved. I agree with everything in this chapter, and I'm ready to make a paradigm shift. And the jurisdiction I work in is also encouraging us to move toward outcomes-based assessment. At the same time, however, they have a mandated online event-based gradebook that we have to use. How do I navigate this? I've worked with many teachers who experience this exact same situation. I call this contradictory jurisdictional mandate the two-headed monster. It extends to all sorts of internal contradictions that exist within educational systems. This particular contradiction exists because your jurisdiction does not recognize that outcomes-based assessment and grading and events-based grading are actually paradigmatically different from each other. And not just different ways to do point gathering. My first suggestion to resolve this is to find out the limits of the mandate for using the online gradebook. If it's just reporting out final grades, then you're fine, do whatever. If it is to keep regular records, then one of the things you could do is set all columns of an outcome, weight it to 0, and record whether a student has achieved basic, intermediate, or advanced levels inside of it. You can then record these using 2, 3, 4 if you wish. In my jurisdiction, we're mandated to triangulate our data and gather grades on how students are performing through the COP method, Conversation Observation Product. Although what's in this chapter helps me in this regard, it appears that only some students' grades may still end up being a result of only products, i.e. tests. The COP framework you speak of is a huge step forward in the way teachers are beginning to think about grading and the reporting of grades, but in the jurisdictions in which it is mandated, it is largely misunderstood. First and foremost, it needs to be recognized that this framework comes out of an outcomes-based grading paradigm. Most jurisdictions that mandate this don't make it clear, leaving teachers try to figure out how to put these data into their events-based gradebooks. As a result, I've seen many cases of teachers creating columns in their gradebooks titled Observation and Conversation, in effect turning observation and conversation into events whose data are to be added and averaged with test data. This averaging data, which is not the same as triangulating data. Triangulating data means that we are gathering data from multiple sources in order to seek correspondence. Correspondence indicates that you're getting close to the truth about what the student has learned to do. So if a student's performance on a test corresponds with the evidence gathered in observation, you have correspondence and you are close to having a true measure of what the student knows. Once you have a correspondence between two forms of data, stop. Additional data from a third data form will either be redundant and unnecessary, or will be an outlier that you can disregard. Yeah, sure, maybe some students will forget some stuff, but it's fine. Only if the first two data forms do not produce correspondence will you need to go to a third. So if the correspondence is between test and conversation, the final grade will be equivalent to that of a grade the student received on the test. It is not to say that all data only come from the test. It only means that equivalence as a product of correspondence will exist, generally speaking.
In 2024, a hangry folk
I work in a jurisdiction where we are not allowed to include group work in a student's final grade, but they require us to use the COP framework. In a thinking classroom, all observational data come from a group setting, so how do I negotiate this? First, I have a tough time imagining worthwhile observational data that does not come from collaborative settings. Without the conversations that take place in a group, all we could do is observe a student silently doing something, the understanding behind which would be completely invisible to us, or potentially doing a problem individually on the board, like they've been called up, or it's their turn to do a problem, but like, Second, your mandate likely does not prevent you from gathering group-generated data, only reporting on it. Because you're seeking correspondence, the correspondence is by definition a type of redundancy, then this is an easy problem to resolve. If you have correspondence, i.e. between group observation and individual test, then you report out only the grade they received on the test. If the correspondence is between group observations and individual conversations, then you report out on conversations. Group tests and quizzes sound great. I really like the COP framework, but my students have to eventually take an external standardized test set by regional or federal government. So, actuarial exam or something like that. Or just, GMAT. I don't remember what the one in Maryland was. Anyway. If I use group tests as well as gather data through observations and conversations, will my students be prepared? Students have been in several math courses before yours, and they are currently in many other courses aside from your math course. In most of those courses, students have written individual tests. So, even if you do not do a single individual test in your course, it is highly likely that your students would still be familiar with taking tests. This is not to say that you cannot help them be better prepared by giving them individual tests. Nothing that I've said in this chapter implies that you shouldn't do this. I've simply provided you with an instrument that can be populated with test data, individual or group, as well as observational and conversational data. How you populate it is up to you. My only caution is that you make your choices based on what you think is best for your students and not what is based on this looming tyranny of an external standardized test. Honestly, and I've seen this in so many other contexts, if a student is ready, if a student understands how to do the work, then any kind of standardized test that they come across, they will be much better prepared than somebody who has been preparing for the standardized test. Don't fall for it. At the end of the previous chapter, you mentioned that students start talking about what outcomes and which levels they still need to provide evidence of competency. How do students provide this evidence? You have a choice. Either you get to the evidence by asking a student to demonstrate something to you, or tell the students that it's their job to bring you evidence of what they can do. First option is easy to do, really just involves you giving each student a customized test prior to printing it out. The second one is even easier and best achieved through the use of portfolios. You may have tried portfolios in the past and found them very clumsy. Fair. But that's because they make no sense in a point-gathering paradigm. Portfolios come out of a data-gathering paradigm. They're just a place where students place evidence of what they understand and what they're able to do. Digital portfolio tools like FreshGrade or Seesaw are built specifically to help you and your students gather evidence and place it into specific outcomes, or link it to specific outcomes. Asterisk, this was 5 years ago, so I don't know what still exists. My students are motivated by grades. Are you implying that outcomes-based assessment will shift that motivation toward learning? What does it matter? Don't both result in the same thing? Well, not really. Outcomes-based assessment produces very different behaviors in students. Darian Allen, 2017. Student actions as a window into goals and motives in the secondary mathematics classroom. Unpublished doctoral thesis, 2017, Simon Fraser University. Found that students who were motivated by grades acted on that motivation only when the points were on the line. Their actions were discrete. On the other hand, students who were motivated to learn acted on that motivation at all times. Their actions were continuous. That is, students who were motivated to learn used every possible opportunity to learn. And thinking classrooms were all about giving students opportunities to learn. If a student only cared about grades, they're only going to seize they're not going to seize on the opportunities in the way that students who care about learning will. In several places in this chapter, you talk about getting more data. I understand that when the data are inconclusive, we need more data, but my school has a policy against retests. How do I get more data? There are several answers. Possibly, first, there is no such thing as a retest in data gathering paradigm. The data that come from such an event does not replace data, as is implied by retest. Having students write an additional test adds to the data. It does not eliminate prior data. So you don't say that you're doing a retest, you're just doing an additional test. Second, additional data can come from observation, conversation, or asking an individual student to do a specific question for you. Again, this could be at any time. At some point, however, you must issue a report card. It is then, and only then, your efforts to resolve inconclusive data need to stop and a decision needs to be made. I feel like everything I've read, I like everything I've read, but I'm struggling with a residual feeling that outcomes-based assessment is not fair. If every student's grade is based on fundamentally different data, how can we say that every student was graded the same? We can't. That's the whole point. We want to grade based on what evidence says each student is capable of. And because all students are different, they will demonstrate their capabilities at different times through different data. We accepted the idea of differentiated instruction a long time ago because we recognize that all students are different. If this is true, we must also accept the idea of differentiated assessment. Your residual feelings of fairness come from a place in our collective history where assessment was a way to rank students. Need I say more? Some cultures still do this. And in those cultures, equality of opportunities has to be maintained in order to accurately produce ranking. In most places in the world, however, assessment has moved from comparing students to each other to comparing students to standards or outcomes. When that shift happened, we forgot to let go of our subconscious need to make everything the same for all students. Right? This is not equality, this is equity. We're finding all the rough spots in the fabric here that we need to start looking at and saying, look, not everybody needs the same kind of assessment. You mentioned that measurement errors occur through inconsistency in grading, but the example from Romagnano, 2001, was based on inconsistencies between different graders, which could explain measurement error on big external tests. On my class tests, I'm the only grader. Are there still measurement errors? Yes. Measurement errors also occur through our own personal inconsistencies. Maybe you haven't had your coffee that morning. We know, for example, that test papers graded early are often graded differently than ones that are graded near the end. For some teachers, the grades improve over time. For others, they get worse. We also know if we take a break in the middle of our grading, the papers that are graded prior to the break are graded differently than the ones that are graded after the break. Mood. If that break is extended and involves sleep, a meal, or positive or negative social events, this may exaggerate the difference. And this doesn't even take into account the variance introduced by students and the complexity of their lives. We know, for example, that some students perform better in the morning than in the afternoon, on Mondays rather than Fridays, etc. Taken together, it's safe to say there could be a measurement error on any individual student's test paper at any time. Let's just conservatively say that this error is only 1%. What this means is that the grade they received on the test is an accurate reflection of what a student knows within, 1%. This is a pretty good margin of error, much less than reality, but this is on one test. The thing about measurement errors is that over multiple measurements, it starts compounding. So, if over the course of the year, the student takes 10 tests for you, the end of the year, the grade can be accurate within about, 10%. Depending on your particular reporting scheme, this can make the difference between several letter grades. And this is assuming an unbelievably low measurement error. Alright, gotta move fast. I got no more stalls, and we only got 5 minutes. So, macro move. Grades based on data. There's a lot of micro moves, so I'm just going to read them. And then I'll copy this over and extract it later. So, first of all, create instruments that delineate outcomes and complexity levels. Weight your outcomes as necessary. Again, I prefer doing 3, 4, 5. It works pretty well for my particular grading scheme, all that good stuff. Gather observational data and conversational data, and write those with subscripts. Grade based on what the data are telling you. Be willing to ignore outliers and early not knowing. If they're consistently showing you that they've forgotten something, then maybe they need a retest. Sorry, not a retest. Maybe they need additional data. Organize your tests so that all basic questions are on the first page, etc., etc., etc. Let students pick which page of the test they need to work on. And in some cases, they need to work on more than others. In some cases, they need both the basic and the intermediate or whatever. Introduce some form of collaborative testing. Set up portfolios as a way for students to evidence their learning, and allow some students to not have to take tests because maybe that's against their IEP or whatever. Or you just give them a couple of problems and say, hey, go to your, go to your resource people and ask them if you can just work on that by yourself or what have you. I don't know. Everybody's different. So, okay. I would like to thank everybody for coming on over, and we are going to go hunt down somebody. Dr. Gold is on doing tutoring, so if anybody has any particular questions, go ahead and prep those. We're going to head over and go see Dr. Gold. And then I will be back tomorrow for... tomorrow is Tuesday, so it's Tai Chi Kitty Day. 9 souls. So we're gonna go and play 9 Souls tomorrow. And we'll be back on Wednesday for more mathy type stuff if you're interested in catching that. So, hope to catch you then. And we're going to go see Dr. Gold. So, good night, everybody. Have an awesome time. My name is Obi-Wan Pez. This is N Simplex Pachinko. See you later.